Warning: this episode of Data and Dissonance is intended for mature audiences. It contains unfiltered opinions, uncomfortable truths, and conversations that challenge mainstream narratives. If you're looking for safe takes, corporate-approved talking points, or outrage curated for you by the algorithm, this probably isn't your show. Listener discretion is advised.
On this show, you hear opinions, you hear arguments, you hear voices going back and forth every night. But every once in a while, it's worth slowing down and getting to know the person behind the mic. Tonight isn't about winning an argument or chasing a headline. It's about understanding how someone's views are shaped, where they come from, and why they see the world the way they do. I'm sitting down one-on-one with Rachel for a real conversation. This is Data and Dissonance. All right, tonight's a little different. No panel, no pile-on, just a conversation. I'm sitting down one-on-one with Rachel. First things first, did you bring your drink of choice? Because I've learned over time that serious conversations go a lot smoother when everyone's properly hydrated or slightly relaxed.
I did, actually. Nothing fancy, just something simple. I figured if this was going to be a real conversation, I should at least come prepared like a grown adult. And yeah, I'm definitely more of a sip and think person than a shot and yell person, so this felt appropriate. But I'll admit, the slightly relaxed part might be doing more work tonight than usual.
And I gotta say, if anyone listening thinks they have Rachel figured out already, you probably don't. She's also the last person you'd ever expect to casually light up, which honestly makes it even funnier.
See, this is exactly why you shouldn't judge people by their tone on a podcast. I spend all this time being the calm one, the measured one, and people assume that means I go home and alphabetize my spice rack for fun. In reality, I just don't advertise the relaxing parts of my personality. And honestly, I think that makes the conversations better. Balance is underrated.
So tonight we're slowing it down. No headlines to chase, no arguments to win. Just talking about where she comes from, how she thinks, and the stuff you don't hear when we're all talking over each other. Rachel, thanks for doing this. Glad you're here.
Thanks for having me. Honestly, this feels kind of nice. No interruptions, no timer in my head, no trying to squeeze a thought in before someone jumps in. I like the show when it's loud and chaotic, but it's cool to slow it down once in a while and actually talk like normal people. So yeah, I'm glad to be here.
So let's start there. When people hear you on the panel, they hear opinions, but they don't really hear the path that led you to them. What shaped the way you think? Not politically, just you. Where does Rachel come from?
That's a big question. And I think the honest answer is that I didn't grow up with a single clean narrative handed to me. I wasn't raised being told what to think. I was raised around a lot of different kinds of people, opinions and contradictions, and I learned pretty early that most of life lives in the gray.
Yeah, and you can hear that when you talk. You don't sound like someone who woke up one day and downloaded a worldview. It sounds like you earned it by paying attention. And I think that's what throws people sometimes, because we're in a moment where everyone's expected to pick a side and read from the script.
I've always been someone who watches before I speaks. I listen first. I notice patterns, tone shifts, what people don't say as much as what they do. And that probably shaped me more than any ideology ever could. I learned that loud certainty doesn't always equal truth, and quiet people aren't necessarily unsure. Sometimes they're just thinking. Values-wise, I'm pretty simple. I care about fairness, personal responsibility, and honesty, especially intellectual honesty. I don't trust people who pretend they've never been wrong, and I don't trust systems that punish curiosity. I'd rather admit uncertainty than defend something just because it's familiar or convenient.
That actually explains a lot. You're not quiet because you're unsure. You're quiet because you're processing. And in a world that rewards whoever talks the loudest, that kind of restraint almost reads as rebellious now. I also love what you said about intellectual honesty because that's rare. Admitting I don't know yet takes more confidence than pretending you've got it all figured out.
As for worldview, I guess I see people as complicated before I see them as labels. Most of us are doing the best we can with the information we have at the time. That doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it does make me slower to villainize and quicker to ask why. And honestly, that's probably why I fit where I fit on this show. I don't feel the need to pick a team and defend it at all costs. I'm more interested in pulling things apart, questioning narratives, and figuring out what's actually true, even if that answer makes everyone a little uncomfortable, including me.
And that's exactly why you belong here. This show isn't supposed to be a team sport. It's supposed to be a place where ideas get tested, not protected. And you're willing to be uncomfortable in public, which most people aren't. It's easier to defend a side than it is to question your own assumptions, and I think people can feel the difference when they listen to you. Has there ever been a moment where questioning the narrative cost you something, socially, professionally, or even just internally?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think anyone who's honest about questioning narratives has a story like this, even if they don't always say it out loud. Socially, there were moments where I realized I didn't quite belong in certain rooms anymore. Not because I was aggressive or confrontational, but because I asked questions people didn't want to sit with. When you don't echo the approved language, you start to feel the temperature change. Conversations get shorter, invitations slow down, and you can tell you've been quietly reclassified as complicated. Professionally, I learned early on that curiosity has a ceiling in some environments. There are places that claim they value critical thinking, but what they really want is alignment. The moment your questions challenge the framework instead of reinforcing it, you're no longer seen as helpful. You're seen as disruptive. That doesn't always come with consequences you can point to on paper, but you feel it in the way opportunities stop materializing. Internally, though, that's where the real cost was. There were times where it would have been easier to just nod along, stay quiet, and keep the peace. Questioning things means sitting with uncertainty, being misunderstood, and sometimes wondering if you're the one missing something. But every time I tried to ignore that instinct, it felt like I was betraying myself a little. So yeah, it cost me comfort, it cost me certainty, but I think it also bought me something more valuable: self-respect. And once you've tasted that, it's hard to go back to pretending.
Yeah, that landed. What you described, that slow shift, the quiet reclassification, a lot of people recognize that feeling even if they've never had words for it. You're not exiled, you're just gently moved to the edge. And I think the internal cost you mentioned is the part people don't talk about enough. The moment where you realize staying silent might be easier, but it starts to feel like you're trading pieces of yourself for comfort. The thing I respect about that is you didn't frame it like some heroic stand. It was just a decision to stay honest with yourself, even when it was inconvenient. And honestly, that kind of integrity is rare now, which probably says more about the world we're in than about you. Also, can we just acknowledge how exhausting it is to do all that soul searching and then still have to decide what you want for dinner like a normal person? Because that's the part nobody warns you about. You question narratives, wrestle with truth, protect your integrity, and then you're standing in front of the fridge at 9 p.m. like, I have no idea who I am anymore. So on a much lighter note, when you're not carrying the weight of intellectual honesty on your back, what actually helps you relax?
Honestly, give me just a second. I'm gonna pour myself a little something if that's all right. Okay, that already helps. For me, relaxing isn't about checking out completely. It's about finally turning the volume down. A quiet room, a real conversation, music playing low in the background. Something that lets my brain stop running laps for a minute. And I'll admit, this might surprise people, but sometimes that also means slowing things down a little more than expected. Do you mind if I light one? Nothing dramatic. Just helps take the edge off and keeps me from overthinking every sentence.
Oh, you're good. And honestly, now I feel like I should pour myself one too, just so we're on equal footing. If we're going to talk about overthinking and truth and all that, we might as well do it properly. And yeah, light up. If it helps keep things flowing, I'm not about to be the guy who stops a good conversation. Worst case scenario, we just accidentally solve the world's problems before the end of the episode.
See, this is already proving my point. Good conversations just move better when everyone's a little more relaxed. And don't worry, no world problems getting solved tonight. I'm just aiming for slightly fewer thoughts all happening at once. But yeah, I appreciate the vibe. This already feels way less like an interview and way more like an actual conversation.
All right, let's switch gears a little, because music always tells you more about someone than their politics ever will. When you're actually unwinding, what are you putting on? Like, what does Rachel reach for when nobody's watching and the brain finally shuts up a bit?
Oh, I'm very predictable here. If I really want to relax, I go straight back to the 90s. Grunge, alternative, that whole era where everything sounded a little raw and imperfect on purpose. Stone Temple Pilots is a big one for me. That kind of music just sits with you instead of demanding attention. It's funny though, because being around you has totally expanded my range whether I wanted it to or not. You jump between styles like it's nothing. Rock, rap, acoustic, country, and on a technical level, it's honestly impressive. The instruments, the vocals, the fact that you can just do all of it. I don't think people really grasp how much range that actually takes. I will admit though, and this is where I gently disappoint you, when you started leaning more into the countryside, part of me was like, "Ah, no, we were so close." It's not that it's bad, it's actually really good. It's just not where my personal taste lives. I still respect the sound, the songwriting, the skill behind it. I just miss the grungy edge a little. That version felt like it belonged to my world more.
That's fair. That's the most polite musical heartbreak I've ever heard. Yeah, and I get that. Honestly, I do. I think for me, the shift wasn't about leaving something behind as much as it was about finally giving myself permission to explore other parts of who I am. That grungier, heavier sound came from a specific place in my life. Tension, frustration, trying to work things out in real time, and it fit because that's where my head was at then. As things changed, I noticed my writing changed too. The country stuff started creeping in because it gave me more room to tell stories, to slow things down, to sit with moments instead of pushing against them. It's less about rebellion now and more about reflection. And I know it's not everyone's thing. I'm not trying to convert anybody, but it feels honest to where I am. I'd rather follow that than stay in a lane just because it's familiar or expected. That said, I don't think the edge ever really goes away. It just shows up differently.
That actually makes a lot of sense. I think when people hear an artist change styles, they assume it's about trends or strategy. But what you're describing sounds more like growth than a pivot. The music didn't lose its edge. It just stopped needing to fight so hard. And even though the countryside isn't my personal go-to, I can still hear you in it. The storytelling, the emotion, the attention to detail. That part never went anywhere. It just traded distortion for space. I also think there's something quietly brave about letting your creative work evolve in public. Most people change internally but keep presenting the same version of themselves because it's safer. You didn't do that. So yeah, I might miss the grunge sometimes, but I respect the honesty behind the shift. And honestly, that's way more interesting than staying the same forever.
So what I'm hearing is, I grew up, or at least I stopped needing every song to sound like I was arguing with my past, which feels like progress or age. I'm still deciding. And that actually makes me curious about something bigger. You talk a lot about growth, evolution, letting things shift. And I think people say they're okay with change, but most of them really aren't. Why do you think some people adapt and evolve while others dig in harder the moment something starts to change?
I think a lot of it comes down to identity. For some people, change feels like expansion, like you're adding chapters. For others, it feels like erasure. If you've wrapped your sense of self too tightly around one version of who you are, any shift can feel like a threat instead of an opportunity. I also think fear plays a bigger role than people admit. Change forces you to admit you might not have had everything figured out, and that's uncomfortable. It's easier to defend what you already know than to step into uncertainty and risk being wrong, even if growth is waiting on the other side. And then there's timing. Not everyone changes at the same pace or in the same direction. Some people need chaos to move, others need stability. Neither is inherently better, but problems start when we expect everyone to evolve on our schedule instead of their own. Honestly, I think the healthiest people are the ones who can hold on to their core values while still allowing their expression of those values to change. That's where growth stops feeling like loss and starts feeling like alignment.
Yeah. I relate to that more than I probably admit out loud. I think for a long time I resisted change because it felt like letting go of things that once kept me grounded. There's a comfort in familiarity, even when it's not perfect, because at least you know how to survive there. Some of my resistance wasn't about fear of the unknown. It was about loyalty. Loyalty to past versions of myself, to people, to promises I made when things were different. Letting go of that can feel like rewriting your own history, even when it's not. What I've learned, sometimes the hard way, is that growth doesn't mean you were wrong back then. It just means you're not the same person now. And once I stopped treating change like a betrayal and started seeing it as continuity, it got a lot easier to breathe, and I still fight it sometimes. But I'm getting better at trusting that evolving doesn't erase who I've been. It just adds depth to who I am.
That actually really resonates. I think a lot of people confuse change with rejection. Like evolving means you're turning your back on the person you used to be, or the values that got you through certain seasons. But what you described feels more like continuity than replacement. Loyalty to your past self isn't a flaw. It means you honor where you came from. The growth happens when you don't let that loyalty trap you. And honestly, the fact that you're aware of that tension, that you can name it instead of avoiding it, says a lot. Most people don't resist change because they're stubborn. They resist it because they care. Being able to hold both, respect for who you were, and openness to who you're becoming. That's not something you stumble into. That's something you earn.
That actually brings me to something I think about more now than I used to. Legacy. Not in the dramatic sense, but in the everyday way. The kind of impact you leave on the people around you, the values you pass on, the things people remember long after the noise fades. When you think about family or the people who shaped you, what do you hope carries forward? What feels worth leaving behind?
I think about legacy less as something you leave behind and more as something you practice while you're still here. When it comes to family, and whether that's the one you're born into or the one you build, I hope what carries forward is a sense of honesty and steadiness. I want people to feel like they can trust my words, that I showed up when it mattered, and that I didn't disappear when things got uncomfortable. Value-wise, I hope curiosity survives me. Not just curiosity about ideas, but about people. The willingness to listen, to ask questions, to resist the urge to simplify others into labels. If someone remembers me as someone who tried to understand instead of just judge, I'd be okay with that. And meaning, for me, isn't about being remembered loudly. It's about being remembered accurately. About knowing that I lived in a way that aligned with my values, even when it would have been easier not to. If the people in my life feel a little more seen, a little more grounded, or a little more confident in being themselves because I was part of their story, that feels like enough.
That's a really grounded way to look at it. I like the idea of being remembered accurately, not loudly, not perfectly, just honestly. There's something comforting in that, especially in a world that rewards spectacle over substance. And the way you talked about curiosity and steadiness, those aren't flashy traits, but they're the ones people lean on when things get hard. I think a lot of people listening will recognize themselves in that, even if they've never put words to it before. What do you think people most often get wrong about you when they hear you on the show?
I think the biggest misconception is that I'm emotionally detached or overly serious. Like I'm constantly analyzing everything instead of actually feeling it. Because I don't always react loudly or immediately, people assume I'm distant, or that I don't care as much. In reality, I care deeply. I just process internally before I respond. I also think people underestimate how much humor and warmth there is under the surface. I'm not the first person to jump into a joke, but I absolutely appreciate them. And I probably laugh more than people realize once the mic is off. And then there's the assumption that being measured means being indecisive. That one always surprises me. Taking time to think isn't the same as not having an opinion. It just means I don't feel the need to perform certainty for the sake of it. So if there's one thing I wish people understood, it's that quiet doesn't mean cold, and thoughtful doesn't mean detached. It just means I'm choosing when and how to show up.
Yeah, that comes through, honestly. I think people who really listen can tell there's a lot more going on under the surface than what shows up in the first 10 seconds. The quiet isn't distance, it's intention. And that actually leads into something I've been thinking about more lately. It feels like women, especially thoughtful women, get boxed in really fast. Either you're too emotional, or you're too cold, too soft, or too intimidating. There's not a lot of room to just be without being labeled. From your perspective, how different is the way women are perceived from who they actually are?
I think the gap between how women are perceived and who they actually are is wider than people realize. There's this constant pressure to perform a version of yourself that makes other people comfortable. If you're expressive, you're dismissed as emotional. If you're measured, you're labeled cold or intimidating. It's like there's an unspoken expectation that you should always be just warm enough, just agreeable enough, but never too much of anything. What gets lost in that is complexity. Women aren't one thing at a time. We're analytical and emotional, strong and sensitive, confident and uncertain, sometimes all in the same hour. But the moment you don't fit neatly into someone's preferred category, they assume something's wrong. I've noticed that thoughtful women, in particular, get misunderstood. Taking time to think is often read as hesitation or weakness, when really it's intention. And calm confidence doesn't always announce itself, which makes people uncomfortable if they're used to louder signals. The irony is that most women I know aren't trying to be intimidating or performative at all. They're just trying to be honest and competent. And apparently that alone can be very confusing.
With everything going on, culturally, socially, politically, do you consider yourself more hopeful or more realistic? And what keeps you from tipping too far into cynicism?
I think I'm realistic in the way I assess what's happening. but hopeful in the way I choose to live inside it. I don't feel the need to sugarcoat things or pretend the problems aren't real. They are, but I also don't think cynicism is the same as wisdom. What keeps me from tipping too far into it is paying attention to the small, quiet things that don't make the headlines. People showing up for each other, honest conversations like this one, moments of kindness that don't go viral but still matter. I also remind myself that outrage is addictive. It feels productive, but it rarely leads to understanding or change. Stepping back from that cycle, choosing perspective over performance, helps me stay grounded. At the end of the day, hope for me isn't optimism in the sense that everything will work out perfectly. It's the belief that how we treat each other still matters, even when systems fail. And that feels worth protecting.
That's a solid way to put it. Realism without cynicism feels like a discipline now, like something you have to actively choose instead of just drifting into. And I like what you said about outrage being addictive. It explains a lot about the world we're living in, and it's a good reminder that stepping back isn't apathy. It's self-preservation. That perspective matters. Do you think the way you think, how you process things, question ideas, and make sense of the world is something that's always been part of who you are, or something that was shaped over time by experience, people, and moments that changed you?
I think it's a mix of both. There's definitely something in me that's always been there. A natural tendency to observe, to question, to sit with things instead of rushing to conclusions. Even when I was younger, I was more comfortable watching the room than being the loudest voice in it. But experience shaped how that instinct matured. Life has a way of refining the way you think, especially when things don't go the way you expect them to. Relationships, work, mistakes, loss, all of that teaches you nuance. It teaches you that certainty is fragile and that context matters more than we're often willing to admit. I also learned over time that thinking deeply isn't always rewarded. Sometimes it slows you down in a world that values speed and confidence. But I learned to trust it anyway, because the moments where I ignored that instinct were the moments I regretted most. So I don't think I became the way I think. I think I learned how to listen to it, protect it, and use it more intentionally. And that feels less like learning something new and more like growing into something that was already there.
That makes a lot of sense. It doesn't sound like you changed who you were. It sounds like you learned how to trust it. And that's not easy in a world that rewards speed over depth. There's something reassuring about hearing someone say they didn't lose themselves. They just learned how to listen better. I think a lot of people will recognize themselves in that. As we start to wrap this up, I'm curious. For anyone listening who feels like they're still figuring themselves out, still questioning things, still trying to stay honest in a noisy world, what would you want them to hear?
I'd say, give yourself permission to take your time. You don't owe anyone a fully formed version of yourself. And you don't have to have everything figured out to be moving in the right direction. Questioning things doesn't mean you're lost. It usually means you're paying attention. Try to stay curious, even when it's uncomfortable, and gentle with yourself when certainty doesn't come quickly. Growth isn't loud and it isn't linear. Most of it happens quietly, in moments no one else sees. And maybe most importantly, don't confuse noise with truth. The loudest voices aren't always the wisest, and the pressure to pick a side doesn't mean you have to abandon your own values. If you can stay honest with yourself, stay open to learning, and stay kind, even when it's hard, you're probably doing better than you think.
That was really well said. Thank you for that. And honestly, if people take nothing else away from this conversation, it's that thinking deeply is allowed. Taking your time is allowed. And occasionally pouring a drink and relaxing your brain a little doesn't automatically disqualify you from being thoughtful. Rachel, I really appreciate you sitting down with me tonight.
Thank you for inviting me into this space. I really appreciate the chance to slow things down and just talk. Not as a panelist, not as a position, but as a person. These kinds of conversations matter more than people realize, and I'm grateful you created room for it. And I'll admit, this was a lot more relaxing than I expected. So thank you for that too.
Appreciate you being here. Truly, that's going to do it for this special Guest Friday episode of Data and Dissonance. As always, thank you to everyone listening, whether you agree with everything you heard tonight or not. The goal here isn't conformity, it's conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you're subscribed, leave a review, and share it with someone who appreciates thoughtful dialogue without the noise. Until next time, remember to speak truth, stir thought.
Tonight's episode of Data and Dissonance is brought to you by the Caleb Rourke Thriller series. including the Covenant Protocol, the Prophet Directive, and Black Echo Rising. If you enjoy stories that question power, challenge narratives, and dig beneath the surface, the books do exactly that. Available now on Amazon. And while you're there, make sure to check out the Data and Dissonance merch store. From apparel and coffee blends to hats and gear that actually reflect what this show stands for, every purchase helps support the podcast and keeps these conversations going. All the links are in the episode description.